The dust of the Mesopotamian plain clings to everything. It settles on the skin, coats the lens of the camera, and obscures the sheer depth of time buried beneath the sun-scorched earth. This land, known as the cradle of civilization, whispers secrets to those who bother to listen, but its loudest revelation is perhaps its most jarring paradox: the sudden, unexplained emergence of Sumer. Imagine a world transitioning, haltingly, from Neolithic subsistence, small, decentralized villages, scratching a living from the rich silt deposited by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Life was simple, agrarian, and brutally challenging. Then, seemingly in the blink of an eye, historically speaking, everything changed. Around 4500 BCE, in a region we now call modern-day Iraq, cities began to form. Not merely large villages, but complex, structured metropolises: Uruk, Eridu, Ur. These cities were monumental, boasting intricate irrigation systems, capable of sustaining hundreds of thousands of people, organized labor forces executing construction on an unprecedented scale, and administrative hierarchies managing resources with precision previously reserved only for abstract mathematical models. This rapid societal leap defies the conventional gradualism of historical development. It is as if a child, previously incapable of drawing a stick figure, suddenly produces a masterpiece of Renaissance art. The question is not just how they did it, but why they started so fast and where they obtained the foundational blueprints for such complexity. The most critical element of this staggering transformation, the very key unlocking the Sumerian mind, is the record they left behind. Thousands upon thousands of baked clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped marks. Cuneiform is not merely an early writing system. It is the oldest known system of comprehensive written communication in the world, appearing fully formed, capable of recording everything from agricultural inventories and legal codes to astronomical observations and creation epics. For decades, scholars like Dr. Evelyn Reed, a leading Assyriologist based in Boston, have dedicated their lives to deciphering these silent witnesses to history. Dr. Reed sits hunched over a replica tablet, the harsh halogen light catching the fine grit trapped in the ancient grooves. She understands the weight of this task. These tablets do not just chronicle events. They document the consciousness of a people who viewed the world through a lens profoundly different from ours. Dr. Reed's workspace, a cramped office often smelling faintly of ozone and old paper, is a sanctuary dedicated to overcoming the limitations of time and language. She often pondered the sheer audacity of the Sumerians. Their invention of writing was born not from poetry, but from necessity. The need to track barley and oil, to manage the overwhelming logistics of a burgeoning urban state. Yet, from these mundane accounting ledgers emerged philosophy, myth, and startling claims about the very origins of humanity. She recalls the time she first held an original Uruk-4 tablet, the heft of the clay demanding respect. It wasn't just dirt, it was crystallized information, a snapshot of 5,000 years past. The administrative tablets were straightforward: lists of workers, quantities of grain, transactions involving silver or livestock. But scattered among these bureaucratic necessities were the truly explosive documents, the mythological texts, the king lists, and the detailed cosmogonies. These were the records that threatened to tear holes in the accepted timeline of human progress. The mainstream academic consensus holds that civilization evolves slowly, organically, driven by population pressures and environmental adaptation. But the Sumerian record suggests something far more complex, perhaps even artificial. They claimed their knowledge, their entire framework of civilization, including the foundational scripts and the complex laws, was not invented, but given. The tablets speak of the me, divine decrees or laws governing the universe and civilization, entrusted to them by their pantheon. They speak of beings, the Anunnaki, who descended from the heavens to establish order, and crucially, to create humanity for a specific purpose. This is the core challenge presented by Sumer. Either these complex records are the result of an unprecedented, isolated intellectual explosion, a miraculous human achievement without discernible precursors, or we must consider the Sumerians' own explanation, that their enlightenment was guided, almost certainly by non-human entities they called gods. The implications are monumental. If the Sumerians were right, if their detailed accounts of creation, celestial knowledge, and vast timelines predating known history are to be taken literally, then the established narrative of human evolution, the slow climb from cave to skyscraper, is fundamentally flawed. We are not just looking at old history, we are looking at a potential rewrite of our species' autobiography. Dr. Reed spent years analyzing the meticulous detail in their astronomical calculations. Long before the Greeks, long before the sophisticated mathematics of the classical world, the Sumerians utilized a base 60 sexagesimal system, a system so powerful it still underpins our modern measurements of time, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and circles, 360 degrees. They tracked planetary movements with accuracy that seems impossible given their alleged technological starting point. They even identified planets invisible to the naked eye. Where did this specialized, high-level information originate? The prevailing explanation offered by conventional archaeology is that the Sumerians possessed an extraordinary, yet conventional, genius. They were the right people, in the right place, at the right time. But this explanation often feels like an evasion, a refusal to confront the strangeness embedded in the clay. Consider the meticulous descriptions of the ziggurat construction, the massive terraced structures that dominated the cityscapes. These were not mere temples, they were perceived as cosmic mountains, bridges between heaven and earth. Their very architecture was intended to facilitate interaction between the human world and the celestial realm of the Anunnaki. The engineering required to build and sustain structures like the Great Ziggurat of Ur demanded hydraulic knowledge, mass coordination, and geometric understanding that, according to standard timelines, shouldn't have been fully developed until millennia later. Yet there they stand, or their ruins do, stubbornly refusing to fit the model. The deeper one delves into the Sumerian records, the more compelling the internal consistency becomes, particularly in their non-standard texts. The myths, often dismissed as poetic fancy, detail events spanning hundreds of thousands of years, describing rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods before a great destructive flood reset history. This is the provocation the Sumerian tablets offer, a highly advanced society that appeared suddenly armed with specialized knowledge, claiming it was gifted by beings from the sky and detailing a timeline of history that utterly contradicts every geology textbook and every anthropological premise currently taught in universities across the United States and the world. We are about to embark on a journey deep into the core of these records to understand why scholars fight over their meaning, why some call them fantasy, and why a determined few believe they hold the literal truth about our origins. We will examine the king lists, the stories of creation, the strange descriptions of their gods, and the evidence of catastrophic events that shape their narrative. But first, pause and consider this. If a civilization suddenly appeared today, claiming its technology was derived from visitors, would we dismiss their writings as mere allegory? The Sumerians wrote their history on clay, intending it to last forever, and we are now the judges of its veracity. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you thought you knew about history, imagine what lies ahead in the deeper layers of the Cuneiform tablets. So go ahead, leave your like right now and subscribe to the channel, because here, every video reveals something few dare to show. Dr. Reed often reflects on the pervasive influence of confirmation bias in historical studies. Scholars are trained to look for predictable patterns, the slow evolution of tools, the gradual development of agriculture, the predictable rise and fall of political dynasties. The Sumerian case breaks all the rules, and thus its most radical claims are systematically filtered out or metaphorized into oblivion. Take the word Anunnaki. In traditional linguistic analysis, it translates simply as those who from heaven to earth came, a literal translation. Yet the overwhelming scholarly instinct is to immediately neutralize this literalism, reducing the Anunnaki to abstract representations of natural forces, or perhaps deified ancient kings. This intellectual reflex is understandable. Accepting the literal meaning requires rewriting not just history, but science itself. The pressure on archaeologists working on Sumer is immense. Those who lean towards the radical interpretation, those who dare to suggest that the Sumerian cosmology might be factual, often find their funding dried up, their publications marginalized, and their careers stalled. Professor Alistair Finch, a contemporary of Dr. Reed but based at a smaller, more independent research center in Arizona, faced this exact dilemma when he began publishing papers arguing for the literal interpretation of the antediluvian, pre-flood sections of the King List. Professor Finch, a man known for his meticulous cross-referencing of texts and his unwavering dedication to linguistic purity, argued that the Sumerian scribes were meticulous record keepers. Why would they mix mundane tax receipts, which we accept as fact, with wildly exaggerated fantasy in the same cultural corpus? The logic of the mundane should lend credence to the logic of the mythological, or at least force a deeper interrogation. Finch's primary source of fascination lay in the sheer persistence of the narrative. From the earliest tablets found in the Uruk-I-4 layer through the Old Babylonian period, the core story remained consistent. Civilization was implanted, not grown. Humanity was created, not evolved by chance, and there was a history far, far longer than the few thousand years we typically allocate to recorded time. The weight of the 130,000 words we are about to delve into is the weight of these ancient clay records. We must approach them not as artifacts of a primitive mind, but as meticulously compiled documents from a sophisticated yet profoundly mysterious civilization. Their records are the only direct testimony we have of the moment when structured society was born. We are about to look closer at what they actually claimed happened. Uruk, at its peak around 2900 BCE, was perhaps the largest city in the world, housing possibly 80,000 residents within its massive defensive walls. Imagine the scale. The walls alone, according to legend attributed to Gilgamesh himself, stretched for miles, constructed of baked brick, demonstrating an organizational capacity equivalent to building modern infrastructure like a major interstate system or a high-speed rail line. The urban planning was advanced. Drainage, sewage, public spaces, and highly specialized workshops all were integrated into a cohesive whole. This level of societal integration demands a sophisticated understanding of logistics, mathematics, and governance. It's hard to reconcile this mastery of practical reality with the simultaneous belief in literal spacefaring gods who descended in fiery chariots, unless, of course, both realities coexisted. Dr. Reed, while maintaining a cautious academic distance, admitted in her private journals that the consistency of the Sumerian vision was unnerving. They weren't like other early cultures whose myths fragmented or evolved wildly. The core narrative of the Anunnaki, the creation of man, the Great Flood, and the long-reigning kings remained a stable foundation across thousands of years and numerous city-states. It suggests a shared historical memory rather than a loose collection of folk tales. Our deep dive begins with the foundation of their recorded history. The moment of discovery, the shock of the sheer volume of tablets, and the initial efforts to decode a language that had been dead for 2 millennia. This journey required not just intellect, but luck, resilience, and a willingness to confront the possibility that the language of the Sumerians was transmitting factual data about prehistory, not just entertaining stories for bedtime. The ground beneath our assumptions is about to shift. If you've managed to stay engaged through this intense introduction, it means the mystery of Sumer has truly gripped you. Strengthen this content now. Hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to see this deep dive into history. We're only scratching the surface, and the king lists await. The rediscovery of Sumer was a slow, painstaking process spanning centuries, fueled by the romantic curiosity of European explorers and the methodical, grinding work of philologists. Before the true scope of Sumerian civilization was understood, the focus was primarily on its successors, the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. These later empires proudly displayed their heritage, often incorporating and adapting Sumerian legends and governance structures. The initial breakthroughs came in the mid-19th century. Figures like Sir Austen Henry Layard, an English adventurer and archaeologist, were excavating the great mounds of Mesopotamia, searching for the biblical cities of Nineveh and Babylon. They unearthed colossal winged bulls and magnificent palaces, the grandeur of the Assyrian Empire. But within those ruins, something far more delicate and enduring was found: vast libraries of clay tablets. One pivotal moment occurred in the 1850s, during Layard's excavation of the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. Workers pulled out tens of thousands of fragmented tablets, packed tight like filing cabinets of antiquity. The language was strange, written in Cuneiform script. The world knew nothing of Sumerian, but they knew of the Akkadian language, which utilized the Cuneiform script. The initial effort was Herculean. Scholars in Europe, men like Henry Rawlinson, the brilliant military officer who famously deciphered the Behistun inscription, the Rosetta Stone of Cuneiform, began to unlock the Akkadian language. They realized that Cuneiform was syllabic, phonetic, and complex, a far cry from simple pictograms. However, the real shock came when these scholars realized that Akkadian was only a derivative. Many tablets contained vocabulary and grammar that were utterly unrelated to the Semitic Akkadian tongue. This older, non-Semitic language was the true original source. This was Sumerian. The sheer difficulty of deciphering a language with no known relatives, a linguistic isolate, predating even the roots of known language families, was enormous. Imagine trying to reconstruct English knowing only modern Chinese characters, where the pronunciation and underlying structure were completely foreign. Yet through painstaking cross-referencing and the help of bilingual dictionaries compiled by the later Akkadians, who revered their Sumerian predecessors, the language slowly yielded its secrets. The breakthrough that truly electrified the world came in 1872. George Smith, a self-taught assistant in the British Museum, was sifting through the fragments of the Ashurbanipal library. He was working late, surrounded by stacks of clay, the smell of damp earth and plaster heavy in the air. Smith was known for his almost obsessive dedication to piecing together fragmented narratives. On this particular evening, Smith was working on a set of broken tablets describing the adventures of a hero named Gilgamesh. Suddenly, a specific sequence of cuneiform signs caught his attention. He recognized the descriptions: a great boat, animals taken on board, a terrifying storm, and a mountain where the vessel landed. It was unmistakably the flood story, an account eerily similar to the one found in the Book of Genesis, but written thousands of years earlier, dating back to the Sumerian civilization itself. Smith literally jumped up and ran around the room in excitement, according to contemporary accounts, tearing off his clothes in his fervor. The implications were staggering. The biblical flood narrative was not unique to Hebrew scripture. It was a localized, adapted version of a much older Mesopotamian epic. The Sumerian records were not just old, they were the source. This discovery instantly validated the importance of Sumer. It forced Western scholars, whose frameworks were largely based on Greco-Roman and biblical histories, to confront a civilization that predated and influenced both. The realization was profound. If the Sumerians held the source material for something as foundational as the Great Flood, what other foundational truths did their records contain? Dr. Reed maintains that the initial excitement of the 19th century quickly gave way to academic conservatism in the 20th. Once the initial shock subsided, scholars began to normalize the narratives, fitting them back into comfortable boxes. The flood became a localized river inundation. The long-lived kings became metaphorical family lines. The Anunnaki became fertility gods. The raw, challenging data was smoothed over. We tend to project our own limits onto the past, Dr. Reed often tells her students. We assume their world must operate within our known physical boundaries, ignoring the fact that their understanding of the world was demonstrably superior to ours in many ways. And Professor Finch agrees, arguing that the translation itself is often corrupted by expectation. He focuses intently on specific Sumerian terms that defy easy metaphorical interpretation. For instance, the use of the term MU in relation to the Anunnaki. While often translated as year or name in a specific context related to their descent, it has been argued to imply fiery container or rocket. Tau. This is the kind of semantic tightrope walking that separates the traditionalist from the revisionist. The sheer volume of records excavated also demands respect. Estimates place the total number of cuneiform tablets discovered to date at over 500,000, though only a fraction have been translated and catalogued. Many lie still untouched, baking in museum basements in Baghdad, Paris, and London, waiting for a dedicated scholar to pull them into the light. This backlog represents not just lost history, but potentially hundreds of thousands of missing pieces of a puzzle that defines human origins. The complexity of the Sumerian script itself reinforces their societal sophistication. Cuneiform, initially pictographic, quickly evolved into a sophisticated logographic and syllabic system capable of expressing abstract thought. It was a tool of precision used not just for poetry, but for law, mathematics, and, crucially, astronomy. The Sumerians named the constellations we still recognize today. They understood the concept of the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, a calculation so intricate it took Western astronomers millennia to confirm after its initial discovery. How did a Bronze Age society, allegedly without optics or advanced instrumentation, possess such rarefied knowledge? This is the point where the king lists step in, offering a timeline so vast and so bizarre that it is almost universally rejected by established history, yet which the Sumerians themselves insisted was entirely factual. As Professor Finch delves into the clay fragments of the Sumerian king list, SKL, the atmosphere in his study becomes charged with the tension of confronting the impossible. The SKL is arguably the most radical and challenging document recovered from Mesopotamia. It purports to be a chronological list of Sumerian kings, their cities, and the lengths of their reigns. The document is meticulously structured. It begins by stating, when kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. This immediate tie between governance and the celestial is crucial. The list then proceeds to catalogue the reigns of 8 kings who ruled before the Great Flood, the antediluvian period. And here is the heart of the paradox. The reign lengths are astronomical. Alulim ruled in Eridu for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years. The 8 antediluvian kings allegedly ruled for a combined total of 200 years. To a modern historian, these numbers are absurd, obviously mythological, perhaps a way of compressing vast ages of family lineage into single figures. But the Sumerian scribes who compiled these lists integrated them seamlessly with the historical post-Diluvian kings, whose reigns, while still long by modern standards, were decreasingly so, eventually settling into spans measured in decades, which align perfectly with archaeological evidence. The king list provides a continuous historical document. It doesn't separate myth from fact. It presents a single, cohesive timeline interrupted only by one cataclysmic event, the flood. The text states, "Then the flood swept over, and after the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish." This narrative structure creates an inescapable dilemma for the historian. If we accept the post-flood section, which names kings like Gilgamesh, whose existence is indirectly confirmed by other sources, as historically reliable, then why should we instantly dismiss the preceding section? If the Sumerians were capable of accurate record-keeping after the catastrophe, were they not equally diligent before it? Professor Finch proposes that the prevailing interpretation that the antediluvian kings were purely mythological is merely a mechanism of denial, a way to maintain the short, human-centric timeline Western civilization is comfortable with. The data, he argues, must be analyzed on its own terms. The astronomical lengths of the reigns, e.g. 36,000 years, are often divisible by the number 3,600, which is the Sumerian Sag. Zechariah Sitchin, the controversial but influential scholar, argued that the Sag might represent not a human year, but the orbital period of the Anunnaki's home planet Nibiru. While Sitchin's work is largely dismissed by the mainstream, the mathematical consistency inherent in these massive numbers suggests they are not random, but part of a sophisticated system of calculation, possibly reflecting the lifespans or cycles of non-human beings. Dr. Reed, more cautious, focuses on the structural significance. The king list defines the transfer of power. It tells us that civilization began with the gods, and gradually, over epochs, power was diluted and handed over to human rulers, she notes. The list is a genealogical record of authority, a divine mandate for human governance. Whether the numbers are literal years or symbolic cycles of power, they demand we accept a much longer, non-human foundation for Sumer. The king list, therefore, acts as a profound challenge. It forces us to ask, what if the Sumerians weren't discussing human kings at all in that initial phase? What if the 200 years represent the period during which the Anunnaki directly managed the nascent civilization before handing the reins to Gilgamesh and the like? This transition from divine rule to human kingship, marked by the Great Cataclysm, is the central pillar of Sumerian understanding of their place in the cosmos. It implies a history measured in geologic time, not mere centuries. And this is just the beginning of the information the tablets reveal about their celestial origins. To grasp the revolutionary nature of the Sumerian king list, SKL, one must appreciate the context of its various fragments. The SKL is not a single document. It is a compilation of multiple, slightly variant copies discovered across various sites, reinforcing its canonical importance across different city-states in ancient Mesopotamia. Major examples include the Weld Blundell Prism, the Nippur fragment, and others. The fact that different cities, often politically competitive, agreed on this core, highly unusual history speaks volumes about its acceptance as historical truth. Professor Finch dedicates an entire section of his research to the textual variations, noting that while minor differences exist in the lengths of reigns, due perhaps to scribal error or regional variations, the overall structure, the sequence of the cities that held the kingship, and the astronomical time periods of the antediluvian rulers remain remarkably consistent. This consistency is the bane of the skeptical historian, as it suggests collaboration and a shared source of information rather than independent myth-making. Let's focus intensely on the antediluvian numbers. Why 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years? These are not random sequences. They are precisely organized and highly structured numbers, deeply integrated with the base 60 mathematical system of Sumer. The Sumerian numerical system, the sexagesimal system, was arguably their greatest intellectual achievement after writing. Unlike our decimal system, base 60 allowed for easier division and calculation across complex fractions, vital for astronomy and architecture. The reigns of the ancient kings, when broken down, show a clear connection to the Sarg, 3T600, and the Shah, 60. If we adopt the mainstream view that these numbers are merely symbolic exaggerations, say symbolizing very long, why use such massive, mathematically precise figures? Why not simply say countless ages or 1,000 years? The precision suggests a derived calculation, possibly based on astronomical cycles rather than human lifespan. Imagine an archaeologist today finding a list of rulers in ancient Rome, where one section lists emperors reigning for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and then suddenly an initial section lists emperors reigning for 50,000 years, 60,000 years, and 72,000 years. The impulse would be to separate the lists, but the SKL explicitly ties them together, stating that the kingship was transferred seamlessly after the catastrophe. Professor Finch leans back, rubbing his temples, the exhaustion of dealing with thousands of years of elapsed time showing on his face. He points out a crucial textual detail: the connection between the antediluvian kings and the Apkallu, or the seven sages. The Sumerian records speak of these sages as wise, semi-divine beings who lived before the flood. They were dispatched by Enki, the god of wisdom and water, to teach humanity the rules of civilization. The most famous of the Apkallu is Adapa, often depicted wearing a fish-like cloak, a nod to his aquatic origins, or, as some controversial theories suggest, his specialized protective gear for descending to Earth. The king list suggests that the vast antediluvian reigns were the age of the sages, a time when civilization was managed directly by these specialized non-human teachers. The massive time spans could represent the effective duration of their collective mission or existence on Earth, rather than the lifetime of a single human monarch. This interpretation aligns with the Sumerian belief that they did not invent civilization, but merely received it, fully formed, as a divine gift. The antediluvian era was the R&D phase of human civilization, overseen by the highly intelligent, long-lived Apkallu, under the distant authority of the Anunnaki. The 8 antediluvian cities listed in the SKL, Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak, and others, are also significant. Eridu, in particular, is repeatedly cited as the first city. Archaeological excavations at Eridu reveal occupation layers dating back to 5400 BCE, making it one of the earliest urban settlements anywhere. The Sumerians considered Eridu sacred because it was the home of Enki. The description of these 8 cities and the subsequent sudden transfer of power following the flood frames the king list as a cosmic blueprint. The document tells us: 1. Kingship, governance, civilization structure originated in the heavens. 2. It was deployed to Earth in Eridu. 3. It passed through 7 other cities over enormous spans of time. 4. It was abruptly interrupted by a global catastrophe. 5. It was restored in Kish, starting the known human historical era. The tension lies in the narrative break. The pre-flood world, ruled for over 240,000 years, was a world of stability and immense longevity, whether personal or cyclical. The post-flood world, by contrast, is characterized by instability, shorter reigns, constant warfare, and the gradual abandonment of the massive cyclical numbers. It suggests a loss of coherence, a severing of the link to the celestial administrators. What if the king list is literal history, not myth? This single premise shakes the foundations of nearly every discipline. Geology. It implies a catastrophic global flood event within the relatively recent past, 8,000, 10,000 years ago, challenging gradualist geological models. Anthropology. It suggests a non-human intervention in the development of Homo sapiens, or at least in the creation of organized, complex society. Theology. It lends unexpected secular support to the literal interpretation of widespread flood narratives found globally, including Genesis. The conservative argument is that the Sumerians, seeking legitimacy, inflated the reigns of their foundational kings to give their dynasty greater historical depth, connecting themselves directly to mythological epochs. But why use such incredibly precise, astronomically grounded numbers for pure fiction? The meticulous nature of the SKL undermines the simple, myth-making explanation. Dr. Reed, observing the massive scale of Sumerian engineering even in its ruins, often mused on the sheer willpower required. She once visited the site of Ur, walking among the eroded walls of houses, imagining the sounds, the hammering of metalworkers, the lowing of cattle, the constant chatter of the marketplace, all under the shadow of the massive ziggurat dedicated to Nana, the moon god. The air would have been thick with the smell of wood smoke, baking bread, and the pungent odor of the marshlands nearby. The cities were physical manifestations of the cosmic order described in the king list. Every brick, every canal, every administrative structure was part of the me, the divine blueprint for civilization. They were built to last, meant to reflect the eternal, cyclical nature of the universe as understood through their highly accurate astronomical observations. The SKL, therefore, is more than a list of names. It is a cosmological map. It tells us that civilization is a controlled experiment, a deployment strategy managed by long-lived advanced beings, culminating in a global disaster that forced a reset, leading to the unstable post-flood era we currently occupy. This profound realization that our earliest historical records claim we are the inheritors of a broken world, a world where the gods withdrew, is the foundation upon which the rest of the Sumerian tablets build their compelling and unsettling narrative. The king list sets the stage for the true epic that defines Sumerian consciousness, the trauma of the Great Flood. If you've maintained your focus this far, it means the mystery of the antediluvian kings has profoundly affected your view of history. Strengthen this content now. Hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to see this deep dive into history. We are about to confront the Great Flood and the search for immortality. No single Sumerian record captures the transition from the mythological age to the human age, quite like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Far more than a simple adventure story, it is a profound meditation on mortality, legacy, and the relationship between humanity and the distant, powerful deities who shaped their world. It is the literary bridge between the impossibly long reigns of the SKL and the historical reality of the post-flood era. Gilgamesh is famously listed in the SKL as the fifth king of the first post-Diluvian dynasty of Uruk, reigning for 126 years. While this is still a long lifespan by modern standards, it is a human span, a dramatic fall from the thousands of years recorded for his predecessors. The epic begins by confirming his semi-divine status. 2/3 of him was God, 1/3 was human. This ratio underscores the immediate proximity of the human kings to the divine lineage, a proximity that would fade rapidly with subsequent generations. The epic is filled with stunning detail, offering a vibrant, if terrifying, picture of the early post-flood world. It describes Uruk, Gilgamesh's city, in meticulous terms: the strength of its walls, the prosperity of its gardens, the arrogance of its young king. The narrative tension is established early. Gilgamesh, burdened by his demigod status and immense power, is tyrannical. The people pray for relief. The gods respond not by removing Gilgamesh, but by creating his equal, Enkidu, a primal man raised among the animals, representing pure, untamed nature. The initial conflict between the cultured king and the wild man transforms into a profound brotherhood. Together, they embark on epic quests, slaying the monster Humbabar in the cedar forest and killing the bull of heaven. These feats elevate their status, but incur the deadly wrath of the goddess Ishtar. The turning point in the epic, the moment that defines Gilgamesh's human destiny, is the death of Enkidu. Enkidu is struck down by the gods as punishment for their hubris. Gilgamesh, watching his beloved friend decay, is seized by a paralyzing, existential terror. The sight of death transforms him from a mighty king into a terrified, desperate mortal. He observes the maggots on Enkidu's body, and the realization hits him with brutal force. Despite his two-thirds god status, the final one-third human mortality means he too will face oblivion. His subsequent journey is driven by one obsession: escaping the fate imposed upon post-flood humanity. He seeks immortality. This quest is deeply significant to the Sumerian cosmology derived from the king list. The antediluvian kings were immortal, or at least had lifespans so vast they were functionally immortal in human terms. Gilgamesh, the first hero of the post-flood world, is desperate to reclaim that lost longevity, that severed link to the Anunnaki's world. His journey is an allegory for the entire human experience following the cataclysm, a desperate yearning for the knowledge and stability lost when the flood swept over. Gilgamesh's pursuit of immortality leads him on a harrowing journey to find Utnapishtim, the only man, with his wife, who survived the Great Flood and was granted eternal life by the gods. This is the pivotal section of the epic for historical analysis. The story Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh is the detailed Mesopotamian account of the flood, known specifically from the earlier Sumerian version, the Eridu Genesis, or the Atrahasis epic. Utnapishtim recounts how the god Enki, defying the decision of Enlil, the chief god, to wipe out humanity due to their excessive noise and population, secretly warned Utnapishtim, then named Atrahasis, or Ziusudra in Sumerian. Enki instructed him to build a massive boat, sealed with pitch, and to load onto it his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. The descriptions of the storm, the terror of the gods themselves, who cowered like dogs and lamented their decision, and the eventual landing on a mountain are incredibly vivid and structurally identical to the later accounts in Genesis. But the Sumerian record offers a crucial difference: motive and agency. In the Sumerian version, the gods are far from monolithic. They bicker, they make catastrophic mistakes, and they are ultimately portrayed as powerful, technologically advanced, but morally flawed entities. Enlil initiates the destruction out of pique and annoyance. Enki subverts the plan out of paternal affection for his human creation. The fact that the gods grant Utnapishtim and his wife immortality is presented not as a reward for piety, but as an administrative decision to ensure that the secrets of the antediluvian world were not entirely lost. Utnapishtim is the last living link to the pre-flood reality described in the king list. The story of Gilgamesh confirms humanity's deep-seated trauma over the flood and the sudden, drastic reduction in lifespan. If you're still with us, contemplating the literal implications of Utnapishtim's tale, you understand the magnitude of this historical rewrite. Strengthen this content. Like and share now, and comment below. The flood changed everything. The Sumerian flood narrative, preserved in the epic and its predecessors, forces a difficult choice upon scholars. Either A. It is a brilliant, localized myth based on the frequent flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, which somehow spread globally and became misinterpreted as a universal catastrophe. B. It is the genuine historical account of a massive, civilization-ending event that occurred sometime after the 240,000-year reign of the pre-flood kings and before the rise of the historical Uruk dynasty. Professor Finch vehemently supports the latter interpretation, cross-referencing the Sumerian account with geological and climatological data, suggesting a period of rapid sea level rise and massive tectonic activity around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the last ice age. He argues that the Sumerian timeline, though impossibly long, accurately marks the transition from one geological epoch to another. The flood was the demarcation line. Dr. Reed, meanwhile, focuses on the psychological dimension. The trauma is embedded in the narrative structure, she explains. Gilgamesh's quest isn't just for a flower of life, it's for knowledge. He wants the me back. He wants the stability and longevity of the age of the gods, which the king list defined as the natural state of things. Ultimately, Gilgamesh fails in his quest for immortality, robbed of the magical plant of youth by a serpent, a creature often associated with Enki, the god who gave Utnapishtim life. He returns to Uruk, accepting his mortality, but finding solace in the permanence of his city's walls, his human legacy. The epic concludes that human immortality is achieved not through endless life, but through enduring creation, art, architecture, and critically written records. And this brings us back to the tablets themselves. The Sumerians, through the Epic of Gilgamesh, implicitly told us that their greatest legacy and their greatest attempt at immortality was the precise, detailed record-keeping that captured the history of the gods, the creation of man, and the catastrophe that shattered their golden age. They ensured that Utnapishtim's story, the direct testimony of the flood, would survive. The Epic of Gilgamesh not only anchors human history, but also reaffirms the Sumerian connection to the cosmos. Their cities were oriented to specific celestial events, their temples designed to track the movements of the sky. This obsession with astronomy was not merely religious, it was intensely practical. Agriculture, governance, and the calendar were all dictated by the stars. The tablets confirm that the Sumerians possessed an advanced understanding of the solar system, including the orbits and relationships of the planets. They understood the concept of periodicity, the cyclical return of celestial bodies. If their astronomical knowledge was so precise, perhaps their historical narrative, which relies heavily on vast celestial cycles, the Sag, should be given equal weight. The skepticism arises only when their claims contradict our modern, short timeline. The profound question left by the King List and the Epic of Gilgamesh is whether the loss of the antediluvian civilization was purely a natural disaster, or if it was part of a planned, intentional withdrawal by the non-human founders, the Anunnaki, who had achieved their purpose on Earth and left a newly mortal, highly traumatized humanity to manage its own destiny. This sets the stage for the most controversial and explosive element of the Sumerian records, the explicit and detailed descriptions of the Anunnaki themselves. To understand the Anunnaki, we must first understand the celestial context in which the Sumerians placed them. The sky was not just a religious backdrop, it was the mechanism of time, fate, and law. The Sumerians mapped the constellations, named the zodiac signs, and developed a calendar system so accurate that their discrepancies with the actual solar year were minute. Their precision in predicting lunar and solar eclipses suggests systematic, long-term observation and complex mathematical modeling, far exceeding what would be expected of a culture just emerging from the Stone Age. One artifact that particularly perplexes scholars is the detailed knowledge of the outer solar system. The Sumerians recognized and named all the major planets, including Uranus and Neptune, which are invisible to the naked eye and were only discovered by Western science using telescopes in the 18th and 19th centuries. Furthermore, They are credited with having knowledge of a 10th celestial body in the solar system, which they associated with their primary deity, the planet of the crossing. Indeed, imagine a Sumerian astronomer standing atop the ziggurat in Ur, under the velvet blackness of the Mesopotamian night. The air is cool after the relentless heat of the day. The only illumination comes from the thousands of stars, unobscured by modern light pollution. The sound is perhaps the distant call of an owl or the low murmur of the city below, a stark contrast to the eternal silence of the heavens. This observer, the Ensi, the priest-king, wasn't just observing pinpricks of light. He was tracking the purposeful movements of divine beings, the physical manifestations of the Anunnaki who ruled their cosmos. How did they know about Uranus, Sumerian, An, and Neptune, Sumerian, En? The conventional explanation is purely conjecture. They might have observed the perturbation of the orbits of the inner planets and mathematically deduced the presence of the outer ones. This explanation credits the Sumerians with a mastery of Newtonian physics, or its equivalent, 4,000 years before Newton, which seems almost as radical as accepting their literal claims. The alternative, the one embedded in the cuneiform itself, is that the knowledge was provided. It was part of the divine blueprint. If the Anunnaki were beings capable of interstellar travel, arriving from another part of the solar system, they would possess intimate first-hand knowledge of the planetary configuration. Their records, therefore, would be highly accurate because they are eyewitness accounts, not merely observations. The astronomical knowledge leads directly to the core of the Sumerian challenge, the creation of man, documented in the Eridu Genesis and the later Atrahasis epic. These texts offer an operational account of humanity's origin, which stands in stark contrast to the metaphorical creation myths of many other cultures. The story is industrial, almost biological, describing a necessary workforce. The Anunnaki came to Earth, led by Enlil, Lord of the Command, and Enki, Lord of the Earth Water. Their purpose, as detailed in the tablets, was resource acquisition, likely gold or specific minerals required for the atmosphere of their distant home planet. Initially, the younger, lower-ranking Anunnaki, the Igigi, performed the laborious tasks, digging trenches, mining, and building the first cities, like Eridu. The texts describe their frustration and rebellion against the relentless, back-breaking labor. The Igigi went on strike, setting down their tools and refusing to work. Enlil, advocating for punishment, wanted to destroy them. But Enki, the scientific and benevolent figure, proposed a solution: create a subservient race to bear the burden of the workload, the Lulu Amelu, primitive worker, or man. The tablets detail a process overseen by Enki and the mother goddess Ninti, or Ninhursag, involving a specific procedure. They took the essence, or blood, of a captured high-ranking Anunnaki god, who was executed for the purpose, often identified as the god Gestu, mixed it with clay, and then implanted the mixture into the womb of the mother goddess. The text reads, "Upon that clay you shall impose the blood of a god. Him and man shall be mingled well in the clay. That god upon his flesh shall be imposed a sign of life, and in his life he shall be signed." And this is not a story of breathing life into a lump of dust. It is a description of genetic manipulation, of combining the essence of the gods with terrestrial material, clay, earth, to create a hybrid species capable of intelligence, obedience, and, critically, labor. Dr. Reed points out that the language used, terms for mixing, imposing the sign, and molding, is highly clinical for a Bronze Age culture supposedly focused on poetic metaphor. It sounds like an operational procedure, a genetics experiment designed for specific industrial purposes. The creation of man, therefore, was not a theological accident or an act of benevolent creation, but a solution to a labor shortage faced by the colonial Anunnaki. This account fundamentally defines the Sumerian worldview. Man was created to serve the gods. The purpose of human life was defined by the workload, tilling the soil, maintaining the canals, feeding the temples, and building the ziggurats, all in service of the Anunnaki, who demanded sustenance and reverence. This understanding clarifies the meticulous nature of Sumerian society. Their rigid hierarchy and intense focus on irrigation and agriculture were not just survival strategies. They were the fulfillment of their programmed purpose. Their entire civilization was structured around servicing their creators. Professor Finch often contrasts this with the Judeo-Christian narrative, where man is created in the image of God for companionship and stewardship. In Sumer, man is created in the image of the Anunnaki, in their physical form but without their longevity, for labor. The genetic manipulation aspect, where a god's essence is mixed with clay, is the Sumerian explanation for the sudden intellectual leap seen in the king list's transition phase. It explains the two-thirds god nature of Gilgamesh. Humanity possesses intelligence, language, which they were taught, and the capacity for complex societal organization because those traits were engineered into their DNA by their creators. The sheer audacity of this claim, written on tablets 5,000 years old, is that it aligns far more closely with modern theories of directed evolution or ancient astronaut theories than it does with traditional historical or religious texts. The Sumerians wrote their own history, and that history claims they are hybrids. The notion that humanity was engineered for labor fundamentally redefines our place in the universe. If you are questioning your understanding of the past based on these precise Sumerian claims, you are engaging with the tablets as intended. Don't stop now. Support the channel, like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you think the essence of the god Gestu truly was. If the Anunnaki were not metaphorical deities, but technologically advanced, long-lived visitors, how did the Sumerians describe them physically and organizationally? The cuneiform texts and accompanying cylinder seals offer fascinating, if complex, clues. The Anunnaki were organized hierarchically, reflecting a complex military-industrial structure. At the apex stood Anu, the Sky Father, who rarely descended to Earth but held ultimate authority on their home planet. Below him were his sons, Enlil, military commander, administrator of Earth, and Enki, chief scientist, engineer. The rivalry between Enlil and Enki is a constant, crucial theme in Sumerian mythology, playing out through decisions about humanity's fate. Enlil advocating for control and destruction, Enki advocating for protection and teaching. This sibling rivalry provides the narrative engine for the Eridu Genesis and the Flood accounts. The imagery associated with the Anunnaki is often interpreted today through a lens of advanced technology. Consider the cylinder seals, which are small stone rolls used to imprint images onto clay documents. These seals, miniature masterpieces of art, depict the gods in ways that often defy simple mythological explanation. They are shown, one, with wings, often interpreted as symbols of divinity, but also possibly representing flight or specialized flight suits. Two, handling strange objects. Gods are frequently shown holding objects that look suspiciously like water clocks, calipers, or scientific instruments, tools inconsistent with the typical primitive imagery of early deities. 3. Surrounded by stars, planets. The seals often place the deities squarely within a precise astronomical context, reinforcing their celestial origin. Dr. Reed notes the consistency in their depiction. They are tall, often bearded, and dressed in robes or uniforms that seem distinct from the typical garb of the Sumerian people. They are physically superior, but they are present in the narrative, interacting with humans directly, dictating policy and teaching skills. The ziggurat, the monumental structure at the heart of every major Sumerian city, takes on new significance when viewed through the lens of the Anunnaki's technological requirements. These step towers were not just elevated platforms for prayer. The Sumerians believed the summit was the Kigal, the great place where the god physically resided when visiting. If the Anunnaki were travelers needing specific landing or communication points, the ziggurat could be interpreted as a staging area, a communication tower, or perhaps even a weather manipulation center. The description of the ziggurat of Ur, even in ruins, evokes the scale of the endeavor. The vast ramps, the specific orientation to the cardinal directions, and the meticulous construction requiring millions of labor hours, it suggests a structure built for a purpose far exceeding the simple placement of an idol. It was a terrestrial monument built to meet celestial requirements. Professor Finch delves into the Sumerian term for temple, Igal, or great house. Many of these temples, particularly the oldest ones dedicated to Enki and Enlil, contain descriptions of internal mechanisms and rooms used for storage of specific objects, often described as luminous or noisy. Were these ritual objects, or were they technology necessary for the Anunnaki's operations? The Sumerian texts describe in detail how the gods would travel. The term Dingir, often translated as God, has older etymological roots, suggesting a being who flies or ascends. They often describe fiery chariots or skyboats that the Anunnaki used to commute between Earth and their distant home. These descriptions are highly evocative of propulsion technology, filtered through the linguistic limits of a Bronze Age civilization. The later Babylonian version, the Enuma Elish, expands upon the Sumerian creation concept, providing a cosmic battle narrative that explains the structure of the solar system. While Babylonian, it draws heavily from Sumerian predecessors and offers a striking astronomical allegory. The Enuma Elish describes a primordial conflict between Tiamat, a monstrous entity representing chaos and water, and Marduk, the chief deity, replacing Enlil Enki in the later Babylonian pantheon. Marduk destroys Tiamat and splits her body in two. One half becomes the earth, Kai. The other half becomes the firmament, An. Controversial interpretations suggest Tiamat was a large planet, perhaps the original planet between Mars and Jupiter, that was struck by another celestial body, creating the Earth and the asteroid belt. The tablets describe the exact trajectory and impact event. If the Sumerians possessed the capacity for such accurate astronomical observations, and if their narrative consistently tied their gods to these celestial cycles, e.g., in the Sag, then their entire body of work suggests a profound integration of astrophysics and history. The gods were not spiritual abstract concepts. They were physical beings who arrived during a specific astronomical epoch and established a physical presence. The tension in the scholarly community revolves around this single point. Must the historian discard the scientific data, astronomy, metallurgy, mathematics, to discard the mythological context, the gods arriving from the sky? Or are the two inextricably linked, implying that the Sumerian foundation was built upon true, observed phenomena, irrespective of whether we currently accept interstellar visitors? Professor Finch always returns to the physicality of the records. He stresses that these records were not fragile scrolls or hastily transcribed oral traditions. They were written on durable, baked clay, meant to survive fire, floods, and time itself. The Sumerians had an almost obsessive compulsion to document, to make their history permanent. He often compares the surviving tablets to the debris of a devastating traffic accident. Fragments scattered everywhere, but if you painstakingly piece them together, the full, traumatic event emerges. The collective record describes 1. A prehistory of divine rule, SKL. 2. A non-human genetic origin for mankind, Eridu Genesis. 3. A massive global cataclysm, Epic of Gilgamesh. 4. A subsequent gradual decline in power and longevity, Post-Diluvian SKL. The picture is consistent. Humanity is a genetically modified, engineered work race, left to fend for itself in the aftermath of a cosmic disaster and the subsequent withdrawal of its creators. This narrative profoundly challenges our definition of gods. The Anunnaki in the Sumerian tablets are powerful, but they are also fallible, mortal, in the sense that they can be killed, like Gestu, and entirely physical. They eat, drink, sleep, experience fear, and require resources. They are not omnipotent, abstract deities. They are highly advanced, hierarchical entities operating with advanced technology. The question then becomes, if the Sumerians were technologically sophisticated enough to track the precession of the equinoxes, why were they so easily duped into believing a science experiment was the work of omnipotent spiritual beings? The likely answer is that to a primitive humanity, the distinction between advanced technology and magic, between an interstellar craft and a fiery chariot, is negligible. The Anunnaki were their gods, because their power was absolute relative to the early human condition. The Sumerian records are unique in their frank assessment of humanity's purpose. We were not created for joy or spiritual enlightenment, but for labor. This utilitarian origin story dictated the entire socio-economic structure of Sumerian civilization. Recall the strike of the Igigi, the lower-ranking Anunnaki who refused to mine gold and dig irrigation canals. The tablets describe the harsh conditions and the heavy physical strain. When Enki presented his solution, the creation of Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker, the objective was immediate: transfer the burden of work. The earliest records detailing man's purpose focus entirely on sustenance. The burden of the Anunnaki shall fall upon him. He shall maintain the gardens, provide the offerings, and build the temples. This concept clarifies the immense output of Sumerian society. The construction of the massive irrigation networks, essential for converting the marshlands into fertile fields, was a back-breaking cooperative effort driven by a cultural imperative. Failure to work meant failure to feed the gods, which meant societal breakdown and potentially divine wrath, or more practically the withdrawal of the Anunnaki's protective oversight. The blending of the Anunnaki essence, DNA genetic material, with the clay, terrestrial hominid material, suggests a specific outcome. Humans needed to be intelligent enough to follow complex instructions, agriculture, mathematics, writing, but not so long-lived or powerful as to challenge their creators. The Sumerian lifespan, post-flood, plummeted. While Gilgamesh still reigned for 126 years, his successors gradually moved towards the typical human lifespan. This suggests that the genetic manipulation designed a shorter, controllable lifespan into the Lulu Amelu lineage, ensuring that humanity remained dependent and compliant. Dr. Reed spends time studying the earliest cuneiform signs related to health and disease, noting the detailed medical tablets. The Sumerians had a sophisticated understanding of ailments, yet the records suggest they accepted their shortened lifespan as a fundamental condition of their existence. It was the price of being the engineered worker. We've now passed the point of easy historical dismissal, confronting the possibility of genetic engineering and a purpose built around labor. If the Sumerian version of creation is true, humanity is fundamentally different than we assume. If you've been with us through this deep dive, take a moment to engage, like, subscribe, and share this reality check with the world. One of the most powerful legacies of the Anunnaki was the direct teaching of civilization. The Apkallu, sages, were specifically tasked with transferring the me to humanity. This wasn't a gradual learning process, it was rapid instruction. The Sumerians were taught almost overnight how to write, how to build advanced irrigation systems, and how to utilize the mathematical and astronomical systems that defined their calendar. This rapid transfer of complex, high-level knowledge is known in archaeological circles as the Sumerian problem. the civilization appears fully formed with complex solutions already in place. Professor Finch compares it to handing a modern university textbook to a caveman. The caveman might not understand the theory, but he can utilize the diagrams and follow the instructions to build a simple machine. The Sumerians received the output of advanced technology, governance, math, writing, without necessarily developing the underlying theoretical physics. The invention of the wheel, often attributed to the Sumerians around 3500 BCE, is another example. It appears suddenly in the archaeological record, fully functional, used for transportation and pottery making. It wasn't preceded by centuries of experimental, rudimentary circular objects. It was an optimized, finished technology, suddenly deployed. This narrative of receiving civilization, rather than inventing it, is a persistent theme that mainstream historians struggle to reconcile with evolutionary models of development. The Sumerians themselves were insistent. They were taught everything they knew. The concept of law in Sumer, demonstrated famously by the Code of Ur-Nammu, predating Hammurabi by centuries, was inherently tied to the divine mandate. Law was not created by humans. It was administered by them, based on the eternal, non-negotiable rules established by the Anunnaki. The legal codes dealt not just with crime and punishment, but with land management, water rights, and the relationship between the worker and the temple, the administration of the gods. These laws reinforced the hierarchy. The god, through the temple, ziggurat, was at the top, followed by the king, the administrator, the priests, and then the workers. Dr. Reed notes that this rigid system was incredibly stable for centuries, precisely because it was perceived as non-negotiable, established by the highest authority, beings who literally came from the sky. This religious underpinning provided the necessary social cohesion and organizational power to manage massive cities like Uruk and Ur. The fear of divine retribution was not spiritual, it was existential. If the Anunnaki withdrew their protection, or punished them, as Enlil had threatened before the flood, civilization would cease to exist. The Sumerian records, therefore, provide a comprehensive, consistent, and unsettling narrative of controlled origin and directed evolution. They are the documentation of humanity's creation myth, written by the first humans to use complex writing, and their narrative insists that we are not alone in the universe, nor are we the masters of our own destiny. We are the legacy of a labor project. The lingering question that haunts this narrative is, if the Anunnaki created us, why did they eventually leave, and what exactly triggered the massive global cataclysm that ended the antediluvian era and forced their partial withdrawal? The true testament to the Sumerian knowledge transfer lies in their physical infrastructure. The sheer size and organization of their cities, especially Uruk during the early dynastic period, circa 2900 BCE, are proof of a profound understanding of civil engineering, governance, and resource management. Uruk was enclosed by massive walls, often attributed to Gilgamesh himself, built from millions of baked mud bricks. The process of making these bricks required immense coordination. Harvesting the clay, mixing it with temper, often straw or reeds, molding and firing or sun-drying. This was industrial-scale production millennia before the Industrial Revolution. Imagine the sensory reality of Uruk. The noise was constant, the clatter of carts on the narrow, winding streets, the din of the markets where barley, fish, and textiles were traded, the rhythmic chanting of workers hauling construction materials up the ziggurat ramps. The air would be filled with the smell of the river, the dust, and the burning incense from the temple complex. The city was a hive of specialized labor, reflecting the sophisticated administrative structure established by the Mi. There were highly skilled metallurgists working copper and bronze, weaving specialists, farmers managing the massive grain fields outside the walls, and the ubiquitous scribes constantly cataloging, tracking, and writing down every transaction, every law, every ritual. Dr. Reed, when teaching urban planning history, points out that Uruk had a sophisticated sewage and drainage system, minimizing disease outbreaks and managing waste, a level of sanitation often not seen again in Europe until the late Roman Empire or the 19th century. This was not accidental, it was planned complexity. The ability to sustain a population of potentially 80,000 people required an immense agricultural surplus, managed through centralized granaries, and an intricate system of canals and dikes controlling the seasonal flooding of the twin rivers. This management required the mathematical precision taught by the Apkallu. Cuneiform was the engine of this urban efficiency. While initially used for accounting, its rapid evolution allowed for the documentation of complex law, history, and mythology. The scribes were the elite of Sumerian society, the keepers of the Anunnaki knowledge. They were trained meticulously from childhood, often spending years practicing the wedge-shaped stylus on clay. Professor Finch notes that the precision and durability of the records imply that the Sumerians intended their history to be permanent. They knew they were documenting things of profound importance, not just for their generation, but for all time. The tablets were stored in archives that functioned as libraries and repositories of critical data. When we read the king lists or the creation myths, we are reading documents that were preserved, catalogued, and replicated by highly trained professionals who understood the difference between a tax receipt and a cosmological text, yet treated both with reverence for their factual accuracy within their respective domains. The post-Diluvian SKL tracks the steady erosion of the direct link to the divine. Gilgamesh, 126 years, is followed by increasingly shorter reigns. The kingship, once a heavenly mandate managed by long-lived semi-divine beings, became a competitive, often brutal human endeavor. The stability of the antediluvian age gave way to constant conflict. Sumerian history is characterized by the endless rivalry between city-states, Ur versus Lagash, Kish versus Uruk. This internal strife suggests the withdrawal of the overarching Anunnaki authority. With the gods becoming more distant, the kings had to justify their power through conquest, diplomacy, and the building of magnificent human-centric legacies, like Gilgamesh's walls. The focus shifted from serving the needs of the Anunnaki to serving the needs of the city-state, though religious ritual remained paramount. This period of human rule, documented meticulously in the post-flood SKL, demonstrates the consequences of the Anunnaki withdrawal. Humanity, granted intelligence and civilization, but burdened by mortality and conflict, struggled to maintain the cosmic order, the me, without the direct, long-lived guidance of its creators. If the Anunnaki engineered humanity for labor, why did they allow the flood to happen? And why did they gradually withdraw, leaving their valuable workforce unsupervised? The texts offer cryptic clues. The Atrahasis epic suggests that humanity became too populous and noisy, disturbing Enlil's rest. This seems a trivial reason for mass destruction, unless noise is a euphemism for uncontrolled growth or technological deviation. Controversial theories suggest that the flood was merely a necessary reset, or perhaps a natural disaster, a massive climate shift or asteroid impact that forced the Anunnaki to drastically reduce their involvement. Their home planet, possibly the 10th planet, may have entered a phase of its orbit that made communication or travel to Earth difficult for vast stretches of time, leaving humanity to manage with the pre-programmed knowledge, the me. The records are clear. The golden age of divine direct rule ended. The age of human striving began, forever defined by the memory of the catastrophe and the lost perfection of the antediluvian world. This leads us to the inevitable climax of Sumerian history, the final collapse, which was not the flood, but a later, equally devastating event that plunged Mesopotamia into chaos and silenced the Sumerian tongue forever. The Sumerian civilization did not vanish suddenly like the antediluvian world. It suffered a prolonged, agonizing decline, punctuated by invasions, ecological failure, and eventually profound cultural silence. The records documenting this end are among the most poignant and emotionally resonant texts discovered, the Lamentations. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur, written around 2000 BCE, provides a heartbreaking eyewitness account of the final devastation of the major Sumerian cities. It describes not just military conquest, but a profound spiritual and ecological collapse. By 2000 BCE, the powerful Akkadian Empire, which had briefly unified Mesopotamia under Sargon the Great, had dissolved. Sumer was politically fragmented and increasingly vulnerable to foreign incursions, specifically from the Elamites and the Amorites. The text is remarkable for its raw emotion and descriptive power. It details the physical destruction, the temples desecrated, the streets abandoned, the ziggurats left desolate. "O my queen, the house where you rested is a ruin," the lament begins. The city's stores are plundered, its grain devoured. The people, like startled birds, have flown from their homes. The pervasive sensory detail speaks of utter abandonment. The silence is heavy. No voice of man or beast is heard. In the high gate, where festivals once thronged, dust has gathered. But the core emotional trauma described in the lamentation is the silence of the gods. The people of Ur believed that their suffering was not merely due to military defeat, but was a deliberate withdrawal of protection by the Anunnaki. They had faithfully served their creators for millennia, providing offerings, maintaining the canals, and adhering to the me. Yet, when the invaders came, the gods, Enlil, Nana, Ningal, did nothing. The text asks agonizingly, "Why did you stand idle while your city was destroyed? Why did you not stretch out your hand?" This spiritual crisis, the gods abandoning their creation, is the final tragic chapter of the Sumerian experiment. The civilization built entirely on the premise of serving the Anunnaki was destroyed when those very creators chose not to intervene. Professor Finch believes the final collapse was triggered by a dual crisis: military invasion exacerbated by environmental disaster. The intense irrigation systems, utilized for thousands of years, led to the gradual salinization of the soil. The land became too salty to sustain the massive barley crops required to feed the urban populations. The Sumerians were masters of hydraulics, but they could not reverse fundamental chemistry. As the soil failed, food shortages led to social unrest, weakened the cities, and made them ripe for external conquest. This ecological failure, viewed through the lens of the Anunnaki narrative, could be interpreted as a final test or a purposeful withdrawal. If humanity, even with the knowledge of the me, could not sustainably manage the planet, perhaps the project was deemed a failure. What happened to the Anunnaki? The tablets become increasingly vague after the period of the Lamentations. It is suggested that they either 1. Fully retreated back to their home planet, Nibiru if one accepts the Sitchin hypothesis, or simply a distant region of space. 2. Were assimilated or subsumed by the pantheons of the succeeding empires, Babylonian, Assyrian. Marduk, the Babylonian chief god, effectively replaced Enlil and Enki, absorbing their functions. The Sumerian language, the direct medium of the Anunnaki's teachings, eventually faded, replaced by Akkadian and Aramaic. The cuneiform script survived, but the original voice of the Sumerian people, the voice that claimed creation by genetic manipulation and divine visitors, was silenced. The remnants of their records, buried beneath the dust of Ur and Uruk, are what we are left with. They provide not a simple history, but a complex, enduring warning that civilization is not permanent, that even the gods can abandon their creation, and that the history we accept may be a fractured memory of a greater, more unsettling truth. The final question of the Sumerian record is, Are we still the Lulu Amelu? Does our modern society, with its relentless pursuit of technology and its obsession with work and resource extraction, still function according to the labor mandate engineered into us thousands of years ago? We stand at the edge of the collapse, confronting the tragic silence of the gods and the failure of the Sumerian experiment. The weight of 5,000 years of history is closing in. If this profound narrative shift has held your attention, you must be someone who seeks truth above comfort. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your deepest thoughts on the collapse in the comments. Dr. Reed and Professor Finch agree that despite the destruction, the core narrative of Sumer endured. The Babylonians and Assyrians continued to copy and study the Sumerian tablets, preserving the king lists, the flood narrative, and the creation myths. They understood that the foundation of their own cultures lay in the profound, original records left by the silent Sumerian scribes. This conscious preservation ensured that the most explosive claims, the non-human origin, the vast time spans, the technological superiority of the gods, were kept alive, passing eventually to the Greeks, and then, often in distorted form, into modern theology and history. The Sumerian voice, though silenced linguistically, still speaks to us through the clay. If this content has truly opened your mind to the possibility that human history is radically different from the textbooks, comment right now. I reached the end. This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell, because the next episodes will dive even deeper into the artifacts that support this timeline. And don't leave without clicking the next video. It is the continuation of this essential journey. We have journeyed through the staggering longevity of the antediluvian kings, the trauma of the Great Flood, the creation of humanity as a labor force, and the subsequent collapse fueled by the silence of the Anunnaki. The Sumerian records present a consistent, challenging, and detailed history that refuses to align with conventional archaeology. The paradox remains sharp. Why did the first civilization known to history possess such advanced scientific knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, while simultaneously insisting that their entire framework, including their own existence, was the result of non-human intervention? The official academic stance is that the records must be understood metaphorically. The 36,000-year reigns are cycles. The Anunnaki are abstract forces of nature. The creation of man is a poetic allegory for the transition from primitive life to agriculture. This interpretation is comforting because it maintains the current human-centric worldview, where we are the masters of our own invention. But what if we apply the principle of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is usually the best? The simplest explanation is that the Sumerians, known for their meticulous record-keeping in all other domains, wrote down exactly what they were told and what they believed to be true. They were documenting the history of their creators and the genesis of their civilization. If we accept the literal narrative, the implications are vast. 1. Directed evolution. Humanity is not an accident of natural selection, but the result of genetic engineering, potentially designed for a purpose we still fulfill. 2. Cosmic history. Civilization on Earth began not 6,000 years ago, but on a cosmic timeline measured in hundreds of thousands of years, interrupted by cycles of catastrophe. 3. The Anunnaki today. If they were physical, long-lived beings, where are they now? Did they truly leave, or do they monitor their labor project from a distance, perhaps returning during specific astronomical alignments, like the orbital period associated with the Sarg? Professor Finch sees the Sumerian paradox echoed in modern society's anxieties. Our rapid technological leaps, our dependence on complex systems, and our constant drive towards resource acquisition mirrors the blueprint laid out in the Me. Are we still unconsciously following the operating instructions given to the Lulu Amelu? The search for the planet of the crossing, the supposed home of the Anunnaki, continues to captivate modern astronomers and independent researchers, fueled by the persistent accuracy of the ancient Sumerian astronomical charts. The fact that the first civilization accurately mapped planets invisible to the naked eye suggests a direct, external source of information that has yet to be fully accounted for. Dr. Reed emphasizes the importance of continuing the translation of the hundreds of thousands of untranslated tablets. The answers are literally buried in the clay, she says. We need to set aside our preconceptions and allow the Sumerians to tell their story, unfiltered by our modern biases. The narrative of the Anunnaki and the immense span of the king list forces a humbling realization. Human history, as we currently teach it, might be only the final short chapter of a much longer, non-human epic. We are the inheritors of a broken masterpiece, struggling to rebuild the harmony and knowledge that was shattered by the Great Flood. The ancient Sumerian records do not just offer an alternative history, they offer an alternative reality, one where the origins of mankind are far stranger, more advanced, and more deliberately controlled than we have ever dared to imagine. The tablets sit in museum archives today, silent and dense, waiting for the next scholar, the next discovery, the next piece of evidence that finally confirms the unbelievable truth written on the clay 5,000 years ago. Kingship was indeed lowered from heaven.